Hi, this is Joan. I'm going to talk to you about the community health nursing that I did this semester. I had to do a paper on the community of Hornell. I had to research the demographics and do a paper after identifying a community health issue. And I also had to implement a project based on that community health issue. And then I had to write a paper on the implementation of that project. But I'll start with how we did the community paper first. First we met at Friendly's. It was Dr. Shaver and a student nurse and I met at Friendly's after researching. We all researched an aspect of Hornell's demographics, and then we reviewed that at Friendly's, and then the student nurse and I, or the student teacher and I, went and did what they call a dashboard survey, which is driving through the town of Hornell and looking for issues that could be public health concerns, like if the sidewalks weren't good or something along that line. So we started out going down the east side of Hornell, down where Ostrom is, and noticed that there was a lot of rundown housing there. That's the biggest thing that stands out in my mind about the east side of Hornell. Then we drove on the west side of Hornell, and this was right after that, I think it was a middle school girl had jumped off the bridge there heading toward Ammon, right outside of town. The west side of town, housing looked halfway decent housing. It wasn't as run down as it was down toward Ostrom way. Then we went on the north end. This is all driving of Hornell, up toward Wegmans, and we went on the east and the west side. The east side was more upscale housing, nicer streets and all that. The west side, there was some nice housing, but there was some that was run down also. And then the southern end of Hornell I did on my own, because it's down where the hospital is and I work at the hospital. So I did a dashboard survey on my own of the south end of town, which the housing down there is nice. There's some shopping down there, but not as much as what's on the north end of town. And then on my own I also did what they call a walking survey, just to see what you would see walking that you wouldn't see driving, which would be sidewalks and storefronts. I mainly went on the main street there, where all the businesses are, looking at sidewalks, looking at storefronts, and what all is in the main aspect of the community as far as businesses are concerned. I took all that information back and did more demographic research. And I also interviewed some members of the community that live and work in the community, and then brought all that information back together, and then based on all that information I came up with a community diagnosis. The community diagnosis I came up with was obesity, and that was based on statistics and research as far as how much of a health issue obesity is. As far as the statistics for the Hornell area and obesity, Hornell's obesity rates are higher than New York State is. Obesity rates in Hornell are 28%, New York State is 24%, and diabetes rates in Hornell are 10%, and New York State is 8%. So I came up with that diagnosis, which the diagnosis was, let me see if I can find it here. Risk of obesity related to health problems as the result of poor dietary choices, lack of education pertaining to obesity-related health effects, and in regards to the lack of education is also in regards to healthy eating in addition to lack of exercise. So that was my community diagnosis. Some of the data that I ended up collecting, partly through my dashboard survey and partly through research, was that there's a lot of restaurants in Hornell, and some of the research I did said that if the a 1% increase in the number of restaurants in an area is equivalent to a 0.09 or almost 0.1% increase in BMI. So more restaurants means higher weight status in people who live in a community that has a lot of restaurants. So that what I thought played a factor in Hornell's identifying obesity as an issue in Hornell, in addition to the demographics. And the community diagnosis was, we had to, or I had to implement a educational activity based on the community diagnosis, and it was supposed to be a primary prevention educational activity, which I ended up, it ended up being a primary prevention focus and a secondary prevention focus, in that I identified, I had to identify a group that needed education, and I identified the TOPS group as a group that needed some education, or that could benefit from the education. And as far as their group is concerned, some of those people already have obesity problems, so in that respect it would be secondary education. But for those that don't have obesity problems yet, or haven't suffered the detrimental health effects of obesity yet, the education that I'm going to provide would be primary prevention, because it's providing it before they actually suffer the health effects of obesity. I prioritized my diagnosis on community awareness, community motivation, and my personal preference, and my ability to influence a solution to the problem. The people in the TOPS group are already motivated, so I knew that I would get an audience that was actually interested in what I was talking about. And I felt that in providing education to them, I could not only help them learn of a new way to assist in their weight loss and improve their health, they could take that information home and apply it to their families' meal preparation, and in just talking to their families about healthier eating patterns. So I was targeting one group, but it was actually going to help more than one population. I felt that if the obesity issue isn't identified, it was going to have a bad effect on the population over time. Statistics that I've read say that the prediction for obesity in the United States, they expect it to be 50% of the population is expected to be obese by, I think it was 2030. So all the negative health effects that go along with obesity also then would come into play, and be a huge financial drain on the healthcare system, because chronic health problems are very costly. So obesity is being addressed on the national level, and I could address it here to a small degree in Hornell. So TOPS is a motivated group. That was a good thing that I thought. I had to identify a community resource for my community assessment paper, and a community resource that would could assist someone with an obesity problem would be, I identified actually two. The one was the YMCA, because they, one of their mottos is a balanced, healthy body, mind, and spirit. And they have a health, physical activity programs that they offer for the community. The other community resource I identified was St. James Hospital, that actually has a healthy lifestyles group that meets at the Y on a monthly basis, that's facilitated by the diabetic coordinator. And between the two groups, I felt like they were both good resources for someone with a obesity problem, because I know that if you have an obesity problem and you can get your doctor to make a recommendation or recommend a consult to the nutritionist, I know that she could help you, the nutritionist at the hospital. But St. James is, their motto or their mission is to be a healing and transforming presence, committed presence in the community. They are serve primarily the underserved and the disadvantaged population. So those were two resources for someone with an obesity issue, and both of those resources serve the community from a justice standpoint, because everyone in the community needs, should be have access to education related to obesity prevention and obesity treatment. So after completing the demographics and the dashboard survey and the paper on the community assessment and identifying a health issue for the community of Hornell, then I had to go out and identify a population that I would provide the education to, which I did, which was the TOPS group, and I had to implement a project. So to implement the project, I had to identify a needs, and the TOPS group, they were already aware of dietary interventions that were needed to lose weight. They just maybe hadn't thought of or heard of the My Plate concept, and also I was going to present to them some of the detrimental health aspects of being obese, which they may not have been aware of. Let's see, on to the next. I had to contact the TOPS facilitator, which she said that she thought that this project would be good for the community, or for the support group. She said that some of the members were aware of the issue, but some of the newer members, or some of the members were aware of the concept, but some of the newer members might not have been, and that even if they were the ones that were aware of it, they would benefit from it. There may have been aspects to it that they hadn't seen before. And then, of course, the health effects would be helpful for them also. My PowerPoint had, it first went over the food groups, the 5 food groups, and then it reviewed how to transform a unhealthy plate into a healthy plate, which all of the members of the group could benefit from. And so I had the PowerPoint before. I had purchased it a year or two ago, and there was 3 aspects to the PowerPoint. There was one for kids, and then there was 2 for adults. One was 33 slides, and one was 80-some slides. I used the 33-slide PowerPoint presentation. I reviewed that to make sure that I remembered everything and that it all was still clear to me. And then I went online and just researched some of the areas that I thought I might have to elaborate on. In addition to doing the online research, I also looked for resources that could offer me handouts that I could use to present to, or to supply to the group. I came across quite a few handouts, and also a CD and a handbook that some of the handouts cost a little bit, maybe $8, and the CD and the book were free. So I ordered all that stuff, and then I also contacted the diabetic coordinator at the hospital to see if she had any handouts that would be helpful, which she did, and I also contacted the nutritionist, which she didn't have a whole lot to offer other than just told me to go to the My Plate website, which I did. The diabetic coordinator, I gave her a copy of the PowerPoint, because I didn't design the PowerPoint. It was FDA, Food and Drug Administration PowerPoint. I gave her a copy of that, and she thought that it would be good if I could do the presentation for her Healthy Lifestyles group that meets at the Y on a monthly basis. So I agreed to do that, and we set up a date for the 21st of November in the morning to do that. In addition to the PowerPoint, with the makeovers and the explanation of the different food groups, I downloaded a visual that showed the detrimental health effects of obesity, and so the combination of all that material was going to be used for the presentation. I had to do a teaching plan also, which I've never done before, that would identify goals and objectives for the presentation. There were teaching goals and objectives, and then there were goals and objectives for the group members, the TOPS group members, and the community. The group members or the community or both. So the goals were for cognitive domain, affective domain, and psychomotor domain. So I did a teaching plan, and then it was just a matter of going in and implementing the project, which I did last Thursday on the 21st. I initially did the Y presentation in the morning at 10 a.m. I was being graded on the TOPS presentation, but I did the Y presentation just to get some public speaking, and because it would help the community and it would help Bonnie, and it would also help me see where maybe I needed to fix my presentation before I did the evening presentation. But anyhow, the Y presentation ended up that Bonnie didn't show up on time. She did, however, come. She was a little bit late, and only one group member showed up for that presentation, which was actually good because the room that they provided me didn't allow for a PowerPoint presentation because the room was too light. We could have moved to a darker room, but because there was only one member of the group for the Y presentation, we just stayed there and looked at my computer screen and went through the PowerPoint that way. The community member said that it was very beneficial to her. Bonnie thought the presentation was good, and she also said that she thought that it would be beneficial to the community to have the presentation presented to other groups, which she thought that she knew of groups that would benefit from it, and that she would notify me if she set up dates and times to have me do other presentations, which I said I would do. It was just a matter of her doing the setup. So then after doing the morning presentation, then in the evening I went to the Methodist churches where the TOPS group met, and I got there about a half an hour early to make sure that everything I had everything set up properly, which it was a great big room, a lot of light, a big wall that I could do the presentation on. So, and there was a table set up, but I set everything up. Everything went well. The room was dark enough during the presentation so that we could see the PowerPoint. After doing the presentation, there was a question and answer period, and the questions were answered adequately. I had to do an evaluation after the presentation, and in hindsight, as far as an evaluation, I felt that all my objectives were met as far as the presentation was completed. Everyone could hear and see adequately, and the visual for the detrimental health effects was completed, and I went over those aspects of obesity and how they affect detrimental effects to a person's health, and I answered questions at the end. So all my teaching objectives and goals were met. In hindsight, the only thing that I can say as far as something I would do differently would be that I would have had someone run the PowerPoint slide, or I would have had automatic clicker or something so that I could stand in the back of the room or off to the side and run the PowerPoint that way, because I kept having to go back from standing on the side of the room going back up to where the PowerPoint was to change slides, and I think that was distracting to the audience members. It also, if I could have stood in the back of the room, I think I could have projected my voice a little bit better. But those were all learning things for me for when I do my next presentation. As far as meeting the group members and the community member goals being met, from a cognitive standpoint, for ensuring that there was an understanding that the community members understood what I was saying, and ensuring that they understood what I was saying. There was the question and answer period, and if they didn't ask a question, then I assumed that they didn't have any questions and that they understood the material. I think that was the only way that I could gauge whether or not they grasped it. But it appeared there were several questions, and it seemed like everybody understood it and actually really enjoyed the makeover plate aspect of it, because it was actually something that they could apply to their everyday life. From an effective standpoint, my goal was for the community members to have a reinvigorated sense of motivation in their weight loss endeavors, and that it would help them achieve a healthier lifestyle and become healthier. I hope to show them a different approach to their weight loss. And as far as whether or not the objectives were met, that remains to be seen at their next meeting. If there's a weight loss or a weight maintenance, that in itself would be proof that they were motivated, and that maybe my program had an effect on their level of motivation. From a psychomotor standpoint, it was whether or not they could actually take the information that I provided and make their own healthy plate. And it seemed to me that they had a firm grasp of that concept. They asked questions on things that they didn't understand. Like there was one question about where did potatoes come into play on a healthy plate. But again, the results of their psychomotor objectives being met, that'll be represented in whether or not they maintain their weight, or whether or not they lose weight, and whether or not they maintain or become healthier as a result of the presentation. And I had to evaluate my effectiveness, and as far as my effectiveness, as I said with the other goals, that is all will be reflected over time, whether or not these people apply the MyPlate concepts, whether they can maintain weight, lose weight, whether they take it home and apply it in their meal planning at home, and whether their family members benefit from their new knowledge in regards to applying the MyPlate concepts, and whether or not being educated on the health effects of being overweight, whether that helps to motivate them in their own diet choices and in passing that along to their family members. So a lot of what I did is things that will only be known over time. Also, a lot of people have trouble this time of year with weight management in the holiday season, and hopefully this presentation will help with their weight management efforts over the holiday season. And when the new year comes around, they can not be trying to lose the same 10 pounds. They can be further along in becoming a healthier person. So as far as the benefit of this project, to me, I learned organizational skills. I learned how to put a project together, how to set it up, in what order you set a project up. I met community members that I probably wouldn't have met had I not been doing the project. I learned of resources and services that I became aware of resources and services that I was not aware of prior to this. And it also is going to provide me an opportunity possibly to do more public speaking and help increase the awareness of the obesity issue, the health effects of obesity, and also how to use MyPlate in weight loss efforts. And so that was how I benefited. And as far as how the community and the group benefited, as I said, it will increase their awareness of how to improve their eating habits by applying the MyPlate concepts. It helped them to become more aware of the health effects of obesity, and that weight loss is more than just a cosmetic thing. It also is a health and disease prevention issue. And I think that the community benefited because the women will take this information home and pass it on to their children and their families, and hopefully in that way it will benefit the community. And hopefully this project is the start of some community action against the obesity issue. So that's all I have to say. I believe this project was a lot of work, but it was worthwhile. So thank you.